Hi, it's Paul. Thank you for joining me on the Albion Yard YouTube channel. In this presentation, we're going to be taking a look at this latest release from Dapol, which is double O gauge, so Hawthorn Leslie industrial tank locomotive. It's June in 2024, and this is the latest release. Packaging is standard. It comes in a normal, typical carton. And when I say standard, that is until you actually get to the actual cradle that the locomotive's been held in. We've got a foam, really stiff foam here, front cover piece, and the locomotive sits on a Perspex sheet, which is a bit like some of the O gauge locomotives. So if we take that out, the whole foam cradle comes out. And my first impression of this is actually, this is really good. Looking at the locomotive, we can see that we've got some fine detail on it. For example, there's lamp irons, and I'll just use a screwdriver to point those out. There's a lamp iron here, right at the very front. Let's see if we can zoom in on that. And that's been protected. The shaking it, it's rigid. There's nothing left in the box, which is always a good thing. Small detail pack here, and in the detail pack we have some couplings, some buffer beam infills, and some etched works plates. And the etched works plates look really nice, so I'll almost certainly be fitting those. So really nice packaging, which I didn't expect to be telling you about. That slides out nice and snug, again giving it a good shape. The only thing that you can hear rattling are the couplings. The locomotive is held on by 2 screws underneath and 2 brass washers that go into the base plate of the locomotive. So my first impression of that packaging is actually it's really good. I'd like to see more locomotives packed like that. Whether that is environmentally better than the vacuum shells that we're normally used to, I'm not sure. Anyway, enough of me rabbiting on about the packaging. Let's get it off that base plate and see what it looks like closer up. Right, I've decided how I'm going to get this off. I'm going to actually use the packaging the locomotive comes in. So we've got the faceplate of the packaging here. I'm going to put that down, then the locomotive foam surround on, and just by dropping that carefully, you can see that it fits nicely into the foam. The locomotive is supported. Screws aren't too tight. I guess one thing that that could be useful here would be, because not everyone is going to have a cross-point screwdriver the right size to hand, might be to do the IKEA thing and maybe put in a little screwdriver as part of the packaging so that people can undo this without any problems, and as soon as they get the locomotive, and then that screwdriver could go into your little workshop. So here we are then. First look at hands-free at the locomotive. The mounting that it has come out, rabbit in there. The mounting points look like they are completely separate, so they're not part of the locomotive mechanism, so to speak, so that looks good and straightforward. The colouring of the model, again, really nice. Looks like this front plate here hasn't quite sat in. I don't know whether we can see that properly. There's just a little bit, I can get my fingernail in there. I suspect that might be something to do with how the locomotive has its DCC chip fitted. We'll take a look at that later. In the packaging is this owner's manual. Again, looks fairly typical for Dapol. Nice quality, nice printed. And a quick look at it. It reveals, because this is the DC only version that I've got, that if I'm going to put a chip into it, I need a Next 18. running in. Says no special running in or initial lubrication is required. Been designed with care to offer many years of service with minimal maintenance, so that looks good. I'll still do my normal running in. We've got some rollers here, I'll put it on those in a second. Yeah, quite a well illustrated manual, and it looks like the DCC decoder is relatively straightforward. We'll show that, but it looks like, according to the manual here, that's undone. There's a screw underneath there. The tank will lift up to about 5 degrees and pull forward, which I suspect is why on this one I've got this slight gap here where maybe it hasn't been fitted back in perfectly during assembly. There you go. We'll take that off and take a look at it. If you're going to put a speaker in, it looks like it goes underneath where the chip goes. So we'll get onto that in a minute. In terms of the overall quality of the locomotive and the finish of the locomotive, it's excellent. The lining is really good, nice opacity to it, particularly bearing in mind there's yellow on a light green there. On the buffer beams, again, the paint demarcation is really good. We've got sprung buffers, nice soft springing, so quite pleased with that. The motor looks like it drives on the rear. We've got this gear housing here, just 2 screws underneath. Couplings fitted as standard, normal NEM couplings in what appear to be NEM pockets. All this looks, I wasn't aware that this had the compensation, but like the B4, you can just see that front axle rocking there. The rear doesn't move at all. That looks like that's got some compensation, so that will be absolutely brilliant for pickup. And when I think about pickups, I'm just looking to see what pickup mechanism they use, and I suspect we have a split axle design here. There looks to be underneath it some good clearances if you're going to P4 it. How that, or EM it, how that will work with the actual wheels, etc., I don't know. You're obviously going to need to do something with the brake gear, because the brake gear looks like it's molded onto that bottom keeper plate. So if you're going to a wider gauge, then there's going to be some thought needed. It's not going to be a straightforward drop-in process. Whilst I've got it upside down, I can feel the cab roof moving slightly, and that is held in place with a couple of magnets. The internals of the cab look really nice. So fitting your crew, not going to be a problem at all. Doing some extra weathering in there, again, not going to be a problem. It's a good positive snap fit on there. Looks like it, because of the type of design it is, yeah, it can go either way round, and it fits just as well. It's a nice firm fit as well. I can't doing that. So again, nice, really like that. Handrails, they are metal into metal handrail knobs, so again, that's good for longevity and strength. So let's take a look at the insides of the locomotive then. It's fairly straightforward instructions. Basically, this has to come off, a screw underneath it is undone, and then this top saddle tank pulls off. The top lid comes off. We can see the screw underneath it there. I've got a little container, you heard it drop into there, because obviously we don't want to lose it. Good cross point screwdriver. I've said it in previous videos, I'll say it again in this one. Buy the best tools you can afford, you won't regret it. This has got a slightly magnetic tip, so we can see it's pulled the screw out, capture it, and the screw goes into the container. So that's it. You lift it forward by 5 degrees, and then just wiggle it and off it comes. So metal saddle tank, so it's quite a good weight on the locomotive anyway. I'll weigh it later, I've not done that yet, but it feels pretty good. And we can see the mechanism, an 18 pin, sorry not 18 pin, next 18 coder. Probably has got 18 pins, but I don't know anything about DCC. There you go. Very nice and tidy assembly. According to the instructions, you remove this to put a speaker in underneath here if you're doing it yourself. DCC sound equipped locomotives obviously come with that all included. So a very good and tidy, neat installation. Let's see if it's as easy putting it back. And if you remember, I said mine wasn't quite fitted. You can see here, probably all I need to do is just give this a push, and I think it just needs sitting in a little bit better, that front plate. So let's pop it back on. Should just be a plain straightforward reversal. Talk amongst yourselves. I can't see anything that's fouling it at the moment. Ah, there, that's what's fouling it. See these two screws here? What I'm doing is I'm trying to push this past them. That's not working, so I suspect if I lift that over those screws, it should drop down. It's obviously a little, there you go, obviously a little technique to get the saddle tank sitting back in. Find my screw. Oh. There you go. Now that, in real time folks, has got stuck to the side of the motor. Here we go, just lifted it out. And I'm making sure I don't cross thread the screw. There it goes, it's bitten properly now. And that just pops in back into place. It's a nice firm fitting. So there you go, body off, body back on in just under 4 minutes. So allowing for the fact that I cocked some of that up, you could fit your next 18 decoder in one of these in under 4 minutes. We're now going to have a look at the insides of the locomotive and the chassis department. So I've got my trusty Pico Loco cradle. There's just 2 screws to undo, this one here and this one here for the keeper plate, so let's get those undone. Be interesting to see what form of pickups it has, as there's no phosphor bronze wipers visible, so this almost certainly is going to be some form of split axle construction. That's good, the whole base plate lifts off, including the brake gear. Not much oil in there, enough if you follow what I mean, rather than it being absolutely smothered with it. It is a split chassis, I can see that immediately. Just looking here, I can see there is that gap that runs down the centre of the locomotive, and we can see that there is also a gap here and a gap here. So this piece here is isolated electrically from the rest of the chassis. So we've got a split chassis design. Lateral play is very little for the actual driving axle, and it looks like it's a small tower assembly or small tower gear assembly onto the motor. The front axles, those do rock quite considerably. Now I've obviously got the base plate off, so that is excellent in terms of pickup collection from the wheels. My guess is we have stub axles here. I'm not going to take the wheels apart, but we have stub axles into a center section, and the pickup is done through these brass collars on the chassis. I've also noted, particularly while I've got the light on the locomotive here, that despite its excellent running qualities, this particular model has got a bent coupling rod, and I can just see it here. Now, I'm not going to touch that because this thing works, and it works really well, so I'm not going to mess around with it. The other side, perfectly straight, but because the model works brilliantly, leave it alone, don't mess with it. So let's pop this back on. The brake gear is included within this keeper plate. And just making sure that I don't cross thread anything here. That's the last thing you'd want to do. And that's then nipped up tight. Not too tight, because obviously I don't want to catch any of the bearings or anything like that. And that then is what the chassis looks like on the inside of one of these Hawthorn Leslies. One thing I have noticed with this locomotive on the large radius Pico ball head points is it does have an occasional tendency to stall, particularly when crawling across the frog section of a point. Now, that very simply is because of the very short wheelbase of this locomotive. The silver section here that you can see, and I'll just zoom in, is electrically inert. So you can see the locomotive is just short enough on this point to be on a dead section with both sides of the locomotive here. This means you've got a very high potential for the locomotive to stop. On the test track that I'm using, it does it occasionally. On the section where I've got a full electrofrog, then there's no problem at all. There's two ways around this. If you're in DC, you can run across at a slightly higher speed, and the momentum will actually take the locomotive across that dead section. The other way round, of course, is to wire up the actual frog. With these Pico unifrogs, that is really simple and an easy thing to do. If you're running in DCC, again, if you haven't got electrofrog points, then you may well find you have a stalling issue if you're running with dead frogs. The other option that you have there, which is of real benefit with DCC, is perhaps you can pop a stay alive in, and again that will get around the problem without any issues at all. So that's something to be aware of on the shorter radius points, the double slip, single slip, and the medium radius points in the Pico ball head. I've had no problems at all, and it crawls across, as I say, the large radius points, this section here, if you have it electrofrog wired, with no problem at all. So I've got the locomotive ready with a haulage test. Unfortunately, it wasn't able to handle my normal test, which is this 500 gram roll of plumber's solder. However, what I've got is car weights that are loaded into this wagon that you can see behind the locomotive. There are 395 grams there. We're on a 3-degree gradient, which is done using these Woodland Scenics gradients, inclines rather, which is what I normally use. So let's see how we get on. So it is slipping a little bit, but the locomotive only weighs 141 grams itself, so being able to pull this load of more than double its weight up this fairly steep incline for a model railway locomotive, I think is pretty good. I'm now going to show a quick test running the locomotive on Pico Code 75 bullhead track. The track is just purely joined with the fish plates, so it's almost like having it on your carpet. It's a little bit more rigid, obviously being on this IKEA shelf. None of the points are wired, so they are being operated as dead frog points. The same with the single slip. And we're running on DC with a Series E Gauge Master controller. Locomotive runs really well, really pleased with it. Now what we might find as the Loco goes across this next point, which is one of the large radius points, and has got a large dead frog section, because the wheelbase is so short it may well stop, and in fact it hasn't. So you can see it doesn't always occur, it just needs to be in the right, or rather wrong position, for it to actually lose pickup. And I think the speed there, the momentum was enough so that it cleared that frog. There, it's stalled on the frog this time. So I think all I need to do is just give it a very gentle touch. It literally is just that tiny bit of momentum that it needs to carry it across that dead section if you're not going to do anything. It's always better, obviously, to have your points fully wired, because then you'll get far better running, regardless of whether you're in DC or DCC. So that concludes my look at this Hawthorn Leslie from Dapol in 00 gauge. A really pleasant little model, and I think one that's going to give a lot of people a lot of pleasure. If you get one, it'd be interesting to hear how you get on with yours, and please feel free to drop some comments down below. In the meantime, thank you very much for your time, and if you enjoyed it, please share, subscribe and like. Until next time, goodbye.